I'm Carol Bacak-Egbo, historian for Oakland County Parks. Join me now for an episode of History in Our Parks.
Whatever happened to Mud Lake? An Independence Oaks County Park story. There are a lot of lakes in Oakland County, almost 400 of them. Even on old maps like this one, the lakes were prominent. I was curious, how did Oakland County lakes get their names? I learned that in 1818, a group of Detroiters had set out on what they called an expedition. They were out exploring what just 2 years later would officially become Oakland County. When they got back from their adventure, they described it in the Detroit Gazette, calling it a view of some of the lands in the interior of the territory of Michigan. In that article, they explained that because they had encountered a lot of lakes where they didn't know the name of the lake, they decided to give the lakes names, in essence, naming them after themselves. Here are 5 of those explorers. And here are the lakes they named after themselves. Here are the current names of those lakes. And you'll notice, except for Wing Lake, all the other lakes have had their names change over time. It seems like this is quite a pattern in Oakland County. Lake names have changed. We have a great example of that at Independence Oaks County Park. There are 2 lakes in the park. The southern lake is called Crooked Lake, and the lake in the north is called Upper Bushman Lake. There's a third lake that's part of our story, and that's WHIPPLE Lake, just to the east of the park. All 3 lakes were shown on the 1840 map of Independence Township. The southern lake was labeled Crooked Lake even that long ago, and WHIPPLE Lake was named WHIPPLE Lake. It seems that WHIPPLE Lake got its name from Joseph Whipple, who had a small farm of 40 acres on the edge of the lake. The third lake on this map did not even have a name. On the 1857 map, all of the lakes are shown, but none of them have names. On the 1872 map, Crooked Lake is labeled and WHIPPLE Lake, and finally the third lake has a name, Mud Lake. I always find it unusual that we would name a lake after wet earth, but actually it's quite common. I learned that according to the 1965 Inland Lake Inventory, the most popular name for lakes in Michigan is Mud. In fact, we have 263 lakes called Mud Lake. It's also common across the country, where the most common full name of a U.S. lake is Mud. There are 897 mud lakes in the U.S. So it seems like the first name given to that northern lake was more common than I thought, Mud Lake. On the 1896 map, all the names stayed the same. But by 1921, there had been changes. WHIPPLE Lake stayed the same. But Crooked Lake was now Lower Bushman Lake, and Mud Lake had become Upper Bushman Lake. What had happened? It turned out that someone named Franklin E. Bushman had started buying up land in the area, and in doing so, named 2 of the lakes after himself. Franklin E. Bushman had started out in the cigar business and been quite successful, and then turned to real estate. He was also on the board of directors of several Detroit companies, including the Commonwealth Savings Bank. In 1930, he had purchased even more land and made some changes in the names of the lakes. He changed Upper Bushman Lake to Middle Bushman Lake, and he changed WHIPPLE Lake to Upper Bushman Lake. Now all three lakes were named after him. Bushman died in 1937, and his wife inherited his estate. She began to sell off land. The Barrett family purchased this section of the Bushman land, and the Palmer Bee Company purchased most of the rest. That was a company started by R.A. Palmer and William B., and it specialized in making conveyor belts. But it didn't buy this land for a factory, but for a farm. They were interested in large-scale farming on the land. You can see on the 1947 map that Lower and Middle Bushman Lakes kept their same names. This lake, however, which had started as Whipple Lake and then been changed to Upper Bushman Lake, was unnamed on this map. And then another complication. A 1953 article in the newspaper claimed that some cows had wandered off their land and been trapped on some lake ice. The lake, according to the newspaper article, was Lock Lake. That those cows were part of the Palmer Bee Farm, and they had wandered onto Middle Bushman Lake. But apparently, in the 1950s, it wasn't called Middle Bushman Lake. It was called Lock Lake. Now, where did that name come from? Well, in 1921, when Franklin Bushman was buying up farmland, there was a little farm in the north owned by Hattie and Norman Locke, and they had apparently refused to sell their farm. In 1930, when Franklin Bushman expanded his purchases, once again, Hattie and Norman Locke had refused to sell. When Hattie died in 1942, Norman Locke kept the family farm. And it appears that sometime around that time, people began to call the lake that had been Middle Bushman Lake, Lock Lake. And what are the lakes called today? Well, the southern lake is back to Crooked Lake, its original name. And the northern lake is no longer Lock Lake. It's returned to Upper Bushman Lake. And Whipple Lake has returned to its original name of Whipple Lake. But in doing my research, I learned that from 1860 till about 1920, nobody in the area called that lake Whipple Lake. They all called it Bailey Lake. But that's another story.